There are 200 people in this room tonight. Producers, directors, executives who decide in 30 seconds whether someone's dream lives or dies. The restaurant floats above the Pacific, the kind of place where the menu has no prices, and the view does all the talking. The wine is cold, the laughter is loud. Everyone here is important, and everyone here knows it. And in the corner, past the white tablecloths and the crystal glasses catching the last of the California sun, there is a little boy sitting completely alone. No one looks at him. Not because they are cruel, because they are busy, because they have trained themselves to look at what matters, and to them, he doesn't. His father is 3 tables away, in the middle of a conversation worth millions of dollars, watching his son from the corner of his eye with the kind of pain that has no name, the kind a man learns to carry without showing, because showing it means the world won. He has been carrying it for 3 years, since the day his wife took her last breath and left him alone with a child who processes the world differently, in a city that does not slow down for anyone. And then a waitress sets down a glass of water she was never asked to bring. She kneels down. She says something. And the boy who has not responded to a stranger in 2 years, looks at her. What happens next will change 3 lives, including yours. Because this story is about to remind you what it looks like when someone decides to see what everyone else has learned to ignore. This is not a love story that starts with a glance across the room. It starts with a child, with a dance no one else saw, and with a woman who understood grief before she ever understood love. If this story already has your heart, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And leave a comment. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Tell me below. Alana Griffith had been a waitress at Maria Santa Monica for exactly 14 months, 2 weeks, and, if she was being precise about it, 4 days. Not that she was counting. She just had the kind of mind that held on to numbers the way some people hold on to photographs. Dates, times. The exact moment, things changed. It was a habit she had developed after losing Marcus, her younger brother, gone at 22 in a car accident on a Tuesday morning when the sky was completely, offensively clear. She had learned after that time was not abstract, that days mattered, that the distance between before and after could be measured, even when nothing else could. Marcus had been 22. Alana had been 25. She was 28 now, which meant she had been living in the after for 3 years, and she still hadn't figured out how to make the after feel like a home rather than a place she'd ended up by accident. Growing up, they had been inseparable in the way of siblings who are close in age and different enough in temperament that they balance each other without effort. Marcus was loud where Alana was quiet. He collected people the way some children collect objects, effortlessly, magnetically, always with some new friend trailing behind him at Thanksgiving. She was the one who stayed behind after the party to help clean up, who remembered which aunt liked her coffee with oat milk, who noticed when someone's voice went flat in a way that meant they were not actually fine. He had called her his emotional translator. She had laughed every time he said it. She hadn't understood until he was gone how much of her own world had been filtered through his particular kind of joy. The grief counselor she'd seen for 6 months after the accident had told her she was an exceptional griever. She hadn't known what to do with that. It seemed less like a compliment than an assessment of something she hadn't chosen to be good at. Maria was the kind of restaurant that existed in a different atmosphere from the rest of Los Angeles. 3 floors above the Pacific Coast Highway, all glass and warm light, the kind of place where the ocean wasn't just visible, it was present. You could feel it in the air, the salt, the slow, indifferent rhythm of the waves. Alana had always found that strangely comforting. The ocean didn't care who you were. It just kept moving. She had applied for the job on a Wednesday in Augustine 14 months ago, because the bus route made sense and the shifts covered her rent, and the environment was quiet enough that she could think between tables. She had not expected to love it. She did not love it, exactly. But she had come to feel at home in the particular rhythm of the work. The way a good service shift had its own choreography. The way you learned, over time, to read a table from across the room, who needed more water, who was about to ask for the check, who had ordered the fish, but was looking at the pasta at the next table with unmistakable regret. She was good at reading people. She had always been good at reading people. The night of the gala was a Thursday. The third Thursday of October. She would remember that later. The way you always remember the exact hour something arrives that you didn't know you were waiting for. The event had been booked for weeks. A private industry dinner, entertainment executives, a few studio heads, international partners. The restaurant had been rented out entirely. 200 guests, an open bar, a pianist playing something delicate near the entrance that no one was listening to. Alana moved through the room the way she always did, efficiently, quietly, without drawing attention to herself. She had a gift for it, for being present without being noticed. Marcus used to say she had the superpower of invisibility, and she used to laugh at that. Now she understood it differently. Invisibility wasn't a gift. It was something you learned when the world had shown you, too many times, too early, that your grief made other people uncomfortable. That the mention of a dead brother at a dinner table was a social error, like bringing up money or politics, something to be managed and redirected. So she had learned to keep the grief internal, to carry it the way you carry a stone in your pocket, present always, invisible to everyone else. She was carrying a tray of champagne flutes toward table 7 when she saw him. Not the man, the boy. He was sitting at the far end of table 4, the long table near the window, in a chair that had been pulled slightly back from the rest, as if someone had decided in advance to give him a little buffer from the noise. He looked about 7 years old. He was wearing a tiny suit jacket that was just slightly too stiff, the kind children wear when someone has dressed them carefully for an occasion they didn't choose. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, palms down, and his eyes were fixed on the ceiling. He wasn't looking at the ceiling the way a bored child does, restless and searching for something to count. He was looking at it the way a person looks at a painting they find genuinely beautiful, like he was finding something there that the rest of the room had missed entirely. Alana stopped walking. She had learned, after Marcus, to recognize the particular stillness of someone who is not absent, but present in a way others can't access. Marcus had had a friend growing up, a boy named Eli, who was autistic. She had spent years watching Eli navigate a world that moved too fast and talked too loud, watching him find his own frequency in the middle of all that noise. She had learned, over time, to stop trying to pull someone into her world, and instead, to walk quietly into theirs. Eli had taught her that without meaning to. He had taught her that the most respectful thing you could do for someone navigating a different frequency was not to try to match it by force, but to slow down and listen for it, to wait, to let the moment come to you instead of chasing it. The boy's water glass was empty. No one at the table had noticed. The adults nearest him were mid-conversation, leaning toward each other, absorbed in whatever architecture of ambition or gossip was holding their attention. The boy might have been furniture. He might have been a decorative element. He was, in the language of this room, irrelevant. Alana had spent 3 years learning what it felt like to be irrelevant. She recognized it in other people, the way you recognize a dialect you grew up hearing. She detoured, set down the champagne tray with a colleague passing nearby, picked up a water pitcher, and walked toward table 4. She didn't go around to an adult first. She went directly to him. She pulled out the chair beside him, slowly, without scraping it, making as little sound as possible, and sat down at his level, not across from him, beside him, looking up at the same patch of ceiling he was studying. For a few seconds she didn't say anything. She just looked up. The ceiling had a pattern in it, subtle, geometric. A series of subtle crosses formed by the dark wood beams intersecting with the pendant lights. In the low amber light of the restaurant, the shadows they cast moved very slowly as the pendants swayed almost imperceptibly in the air conditioning. It was, she realized, genuinely mesmerizing if you took the time to let it be. She poured water into his glass, quietly, set the pitcher down. Then she pointed up, at the pattern he was watching. The boy's eyes moved from the ceiling, to her finger, to her face. It was the first time he'd looked at anything in the room below eye level in over an hour. Alana didn't smile too wide. She didn't make a sound. She just nodded, very slowly, as if to say, "Yes, I see it too." His name, she would learn later, was Min. He was 7 years old. And in the 2 years since his mother had died, since the world had shifted on its axis and nothing had quite settled back into place, he had not reached for a stranger's hand. He reached for hers. Not to hold it, just to touch the back of it, briefly, with 2 fingers, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. Alana felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a word for. She stayed very still. The pianist near the entrance had shifted into something slower, something with a waltz tempo, 3/4 time, gentle and rocking, and Alana, without planning it, without thinking it through, did the only thing that felt right. She stood up, extended her hand, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. Min looked at her hand for a long time. Then he looked at her face. Then he slid off his chair. They went to the corridor just beyond the dining room, a wide, empty stretch of parquet floor between the coat closet and the emergency exit, where the music drifted in from the other side of the wall, but the volume was softer, the voices gone. Alana took both of his hands and began to move in a slow, easy box step, not trying to teach him, not trying to impress him, just moving, steadily, giving him something predictable to follow if he wanted to. He followed. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But his body, which had been rigid and braced all evening against the noise and the strangers and the 2 bright lights, began, very slowly, to soften. The set of his shoulders came down. His breath, which had been shallow and quick, evening out into something longer, something easier. Alana matched her own breathing to his without thinking about it. In through the nose, out slow, the way you breathe when you are trying to tell another body that nothing here is dangerous. They danced for 4 minutes, maybe 5. No one from the dining room saw them. Except one person. Junho Lee had excused himself from the table at the precise moment he realized Min's chair was empty. His heart had done the thing it always did, contracted sharply, flooded with that specific species of fear that belongs only to parents. And he had moved through the dining room quickly, scanning, before a passing server pointed toward the corridor. He reached the doorway, and he stopped. His son was dancing. Not dancing the way adults teach children to dance. Dancing the way water moves, following something, not forcing it. His hands were in the hands of a woman in a white server's uniform, and she was moving with him in slow, patient circles, her back straight, and her whole attention, every atom of it, given entirely to him. Junho stood in the doorway for 60 full seconds before either of them noticed him. 60 seconds in which something happened to the wall he had built around himself, methodically, brick by brick, in the 3 years since Suyeon died. It didn't collapse. Walls like his don't collapse. But something shifted. The way a load-bearing structure shifts when the ground beneath it moves. And he became aware, for the first time in a long time, that the weight he was carrying was not invisible, that someone else could see it, and that she had responded not to him, but to his son. He thought, standing there, she didn't do it to impress me. She didn't do it because she knew who I was. She did it because Min needed it, and she was paying enough attention to notice. He could not remember the last time someone had simply paid attention. Min saw his father first. He let go of Alana's hands and went to him, not running, but with purpose, the way Min always moved, deliberate and quiet. He pressed his forehead briefly against his father's chest. Junho's hand came up to rest on the back of his son's head. Automatic. Tender. He looked up at Alana. She was already stepping back, professional, contained, not waiting for acknowledgement. 2 words came out of him. Thank you. flat and correct, like a transaction completed. But his eyes didn't match his voice. And Alana noticed that the way she noticed everything, quietly, without making it obvious. She nodded, told him his son was lovely, meant it completely, and went back to work. She didn't think about him again that night. She had tables to clear, a closing shift to finish, and a bus to catch at 11:15. She was tired in the particular way that comes from giving something real to the world, not exhausted exactly, but emptied in a way that felt clean. Junho Lee, on the other hand, thought about her for the next 11 days. Not in the way he was used to thinking about women, which, since Suyeon, had been essentially not at all. He had been approached. He was aware that he was considered attractive, successful, eligible in ways the world attached value to. He had responded to every overture with the same polite, immovable distance. He had nothing to give. He had been certain of that. What he couldn't stop thinking about wasn't attraction. It was the image of his son's body relaxing. The specific geography of that moment, Min's shoulders dropping, his breath evening out, his hands holding hers without flinching. In 7 years of fatherhood, in 2 years of navigating Min's world alone, Junho had learned every strategy the therapist recommended. He had structured their home. He had noise-canceling headphones. He had weighted blankets and scheduled routines and a calendar that never deviated. He had done everything right. And she had done something in 5 minutes that Junho hadn't managed in 2 years. Not because she knew more. Because she had been willing to just sit with him. Without an agenda. He understood agendas. His entire professional life was constructed from them. Even the things he did for Min, the routines, the programs, the carefully selected environments, had agendas embedded in them, however loving those agendas were. He was always trying to create conditions for an outcome. She had simply created presence. And presence, he was beginning to understand, was something his son needed, that Junho had never quite known how to give, without also trying to engineer it into something. On the 12th day, he made a reservation at Maria. He brought Min. He told himself it was because Min had responded well to the environment, that the restaurant's acoustic profile, open water on one side, the gentle hum of a controlled interior, was better for him than most places. This was true. It was not the whole truth. Alana saw them from across the room the moment they were seated. She finished taking an order at table 2, walked to the back, breathed once, and went over. She went to Min first. Always Min first. She crouched down, set a small glass of water in front of him without asking, and pointed at the ocean through the window. The sun was starting to slide toward the horizon. The light on the water was extraordinary, fractured gold moving in slow patterns across the surface. Min pressed his nose to the glass. Junho exhaled. They ordered. She brought the food. She was attentive without hovering, present without performing. She didn't speak to Junho beyond what the job required. She didn't try to make herself memorable. She just was there, doing the work. With the same quality of attention, she gave everything. As she was refilling his water near the end of the meal, a question came quietly from across the table, almost as if he hadn't planned it. How had she known what to do? That night, with Min. She considered the question for a moment before answering. Said she used to know someone who needed the world to slow down. Said she had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do for a person is just share what they're looking at. Not try to redirect them. Not try to fix the moment. Just be in it with them. A single word followed from across the table, quiet and direct. Who? Someone I lost. That was all she gave him. She said it without performing the grief. The way you mention weather, stating a fact, not requesting sympathy. She picked up the water pitcher and moved to the next table. Junho watched her go and thought, she knows what carrying something feels like. They came back the following week, and the week after that. Each visit was a Tuesday. Junho was meticulous about this, without quite admitting to himself why. The word routine was available. The word excuse was not quite out of reach. He told his assistant to block Tuesday evenings. His assistant, who had worked for him for 6 years, recognized the particular quality of instructions that were not to be questioned, and simply blocked them. The conversations grew. Slowly, not romantically. Nothing so obvious as that. More the way two people grow when they discover they are fluent in the same obscure language. The language of grief, of quiet, of having learned to take up less space in a world that wasn't designed for the way they moved through it. Alana learned that Junho had come to Los Angeles at 26, from Seoul, on a student visa, with the kind of stubborn vision that doesn't negotiate with reality. That he had built his technology company, a platform for real-time language accessibility and translation for live events, from a one-bedroom apartment in Koreatown, surviving on instant noodles and the specific confidence of someone who has decided they are going to make it even before they have any evidence that this is true. He was 38 now. The company employed 400 people. The apartment in Koreatown was long gone. None of it had prepared him for losing Soo-yeon. Nothing could have. Soo-yeon had been 33 when the diagnosis came. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctors had spoken in percentages, in timelines, in the careful language of professionals who have learned to deliver devastation without using that word. Junho had sat in that office and understood every word and not understood any of it, because the woman they were describing was the person he had built his entire adult life around. And the idea that she was a percentage was something his mind simply refused. She had died 11 months after the diagnosis. Min had been 5. Too young to have the language for it. Old enough to feel the architecture of his world change in ways he would keep processing for years. Junho learned all of this out of himself slowly, over Tuesdays, in the way that water reveals the shape of stone. Not by force, but by persistence. Alana never asked directly. She just listened. And something about her quality of listening, patient, unhurried, without the anxious need to fill every silence that most people had, made the words come. Alana learned this in pieces. He wasn't a man who gave information in full sentences. He gave it in small amounts, the way someone who has been hungry a long time eats, carefully, not trusting abundance yet. She didn't push. She never pushed. She received what he offered, and waited for the rest, and did not punish him for the silence in between. Min, meanwhile, had begun to recognize her from the parking lot. It was the 7th Tuesday. Alana was not counting, except she was, when Junho arrived earlier than usual. Min was not with him. She noticed this immediately. Noticed, too, something different in the way he carried himself, still precise, still contained, but heavier, as if something had been pressing on him all day and had not let up. She seated him at his usual table, the one Min liked, near the window. She brought water without being asked. She was about to recite the evening specials when he looked up and said he didn't want the specials. He wanted a whiskey. Neat. And he wanted to sit here for a while. She brought the whiskey. An hour later, when her section was quieter, she sat down across from him. Not on the clock, technically. Her break had started. It was the first time she had ever sat across from him rather than standing beside him, and the geometry of it felt significant in a way she couldn't entirely explain. It was Soo-yeon's birthday. He set the words down between them before anything else. October 31st. She would have been 36. He described the morning in short, careful sentences. The cemetery. Min's hands on the headstone, both palms flat, reading the stone with his fingers the way he sometimes read surfaces that interested him. He had stood like that for a long time. And Junho, watching his son say goodbye to his mother in the only language available to him, had felt something break open in his chest that he had been holding closed for 3 years. The crying had come in the car, on the way home, Min in the back seat, radio off, the October light through the windows in a way that didn't help at all. His voice was even when he described it, but only just. 3 years, and he had been managing, not feeling it, managing it. And then Min had put his hands on that stone, and managing was no longer a thing he was capable of. Alana was quiet for a moment. She waited until she had the right words. Then she gave them without preamble. She knew what it felt like when the dam finally broke. When something held intact for so long that when it opened, you didn't recognize yourself anymore. She knew how important it was that it had broken. Because the things we carry and seal don't disappear. They only get heavier. Marcus came next. Not everything, not all at once. But enough. The Tuesday morning, the clear sky, the phone call, the way time had reorganized itself into before and after, and she had never fully found her footing in the after. 25, she had been. Already accepted to a graduate program in occupational therapy. She had wanted to work with children with developmental differences. She had deferred and never gone back. The grief had changed the trajectory of everything. And what remained had been 3 years of rebuilding slowly, in the quiet margins of shifts and bus rides and mornings that still sometimes caught her off guard. She was 28 now. Junho noted this without saying so. 3 years of carrying something. Same as him. The ocean moved outside the window. The light had gone completely now. The room was warm amber and the sound of other people's evenings. And in the middle of all of that, 2 people who had each become very good at being alone looked at each other and recognized something. Not a beginning. Not yet. But the moment before a beginning. The held breath. The pause at the top of something before it falls. Junho reached across the table. Not to take her hand. Something more tentative than that. He rested his hand near hers. Close enough that their fingers were almost touching. Close enough to be a question. She let it be a question for a moment, and then she answered it, by turning her hand over, palm up, the same gesture she had made to Min in the corridor. An invitation, not a demand. He took her hand. They didn't say anything else for a while. They didn't need to. The weeks that followed were the lightest Junho had felt since he was a different version of himself. He arranged things, carefully, without pressure, in the way someone arranges something they are afraid to break. He called ahead when he brought Min. Sometimes they went to the beach after, the 3 of them, walking along the water's edge while Min collected small stones with the seriousness of an archivist. Alana walked beside Junho with her shoes in her hand and the water around their ankles. And they talked, really talked, the way 2 people talk when they have decided, without explicitly deciding, that the other person is safe. Min had a system. He would select a stone, examine it in the specific way he examined everything, rotating it slowly, feeling its weight, holding it up to the light where the horizon met the ocean, and checking its color against the sky. And then either pocket it, or return it to the water with the careful deliberateness of a verdict. The pocketed ones were, apparently, the successful candidates. The ones that had passed some internal measure of worthiness that only Min understood. There was something about the ritual that Alana found deeply moving. This small person with his internal compass, his private criteria, his complete indifference to whether anyone else understood the system. He knew what was worth keeping. He always knew. By the end of the 3rd beach afternoon, he had collected 11 stones. He pressed 9 of them into Alana's hands before they said goodbye. She kept all 9 of them on her windowsill. She did not let herself examine too closely what that meant. On the drives back from the beach, Min would fall asleep in the back seat with the particular completeness of a child who has spent all of himself on a good day. Junho would drive with one hand on the wheel and the other sometimes finding Alana's, and they would talk in the low, unhurried way of people who are not running out of time. She told him about her mother in Atlanta, who called every Sunday and asked careful questions that weren't quite the questions she was really asking. He told her about his sister in Seoul, who had raised her eyebrows at the mention of Maria on their last video call and then said nothing, which was, in the language of their family, extremely loud. They were building something. Neither of them named it out loud. Naming it felt like the kind of thing that could startle it away. Junho kissed her for the first time on a Sunday evening in December, in the parking lot of the restaurant after her shift, while the air smelled of salt and the distant edge of rain. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was quiet and deliberate, the way he did everything, as if he had decided it was right and was not going to apologize for that. She kissed him back the same way, quietly, like something that had already been true for a while and was just now being acknowledged out loud. It started in January. Small things. An article in a trade publication that mentioned Junho's name alongside a photograph taken at a charity event. A photograph in which a young woman in a white uniform was visible in the background, partially out of frame, and that was enough for the internet to fill in the rest. A comment thread appeared, then a blog post. The tone was speculative, mostly harmless, but it was there. And Alana read it at 2 a.m. on her phone in her small apartment in Inglewood, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, something older than fear. The specific dread of someone who has learned that the world's attention is not gentle, that it doesn't distinguish between a story it tells and the life it's telling the story about. She had seen what happened to women who stood next to powerful men in public before they were ready. She had watched the machinery of opinion and judgment dismantle people who had done nothing except exist near someone important. And underneath that dread, quieter and more corrosive, was something she was less willing to name. Something that had been building since the beach afternoons began, since Min had pressed 9 stones into her hands with the gravity of a child giving his best thing. The understanding that she was already in, that she had already let this matter, and that everything that could be lost from here was exponentially larger than anything she had risked since Marcus. She had not planned to love this child. She had not planned to want Junho's coffee on her counter in the morning, to know which songs Min could tolerate in the car, and which ones made him press his palms over his ears. She had not planned to become someone these 2 people needed, because becoming someone people need means you can also become someone whose absence is a wound. She knew what absence as wound felt like. She had inflicted it on herself every day for 3 years, simply by being someone who was still here when Marcus wasn't. She told herself she was being rational, protective, that withdrawing, slowly, without drama, was the right thing to do. For him. For Min. She had nothing to offer a world like his, she told herself. She was 28 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Inglewood, taking the bus to a restaurant job while her graduate school dream sat in a drawer 3 years past its expiration date. He was a CEO with a portfolio of companies and a son who needed stability and a public profile that attracted scrutiny. She was being reasonable. She was sure of it. She began responding to his messages an hour later. Then, with the kind of pleasant, complete sentences that close conversations instead of opening them, Junho noticed within 72 hours. He was very good at reading the temperature of things. It was a skill the business world had developed in him, honed over 15 years of meetings where what wasn't said was more important than what was. He noticed. He did not immediately say so. He gave her the space she seemed to be asking for, with the discipline of a man who had learned not to reach for things that were pulling away from him. He had reached for Suyeon at the end. Not to keep her. No one could have done that. But in the way you reach toward someone whose direction you cannot follow, wanting them to know that if you could, you would. He had learned what it cost to keep reaching. He had learned to be still, and so he was still, now, even though the stillness was costing him something different and equally real. But Min did not have that discipline. Min did not understand distance. Min understood presence or absence, warmth or cold, the specific quality of a Tuesday that had Alana in it versus one that did not. On the 3rd Tuesday that Alana asked a colleague to take her tables, she had called in with a vague explanation about feeling unwell. Min sat at the window table and looked at the door for 40 minutes. He had brought something in his jacket pocket. A stone. The best one, by any measure, smooth, flat, the specific gray-blue of the Pacific on a cloudy morning. He had been carrying it all week, Junho would learn later, since the last beach afternoon. as if he'd been saving it, as if he'd known it belonged to her and had just been waiting for the right moment to deliver it. He put it on the table in front of the empty chair across from him. Junho watched his son do this and felt something crack in him that had nothing to do with Suyeon. He felt it specifically, cleanly, like the sound of something structural giving way. He called Alana that night. She answered. She always answered. She hadn't been able to make herself stop doing that. He was not a man who circled. The question came direct and without apology. Was she pulling away? And if so, he needed to know why. Not because he was angry, because he needed to understand what he had done, or what the world had done, that made her decide to protect herself from him. She was quiet for a long time. Then the truth came out of her. The article, the comment thread, the feeling of being looked at by a world she hadn't agreed to be part of. And the deeper truth underneath it, the one she had been less willing to name. That she was afraid of what it would mean for Min. That Min had already lost one person who was central to his world. That she cared about that boy in a way that had surprised her completely. And that the idea of one day not being there, not by choice but by circumstance, by the natural entropy of things, was something she couldn't make herself risk. Not with him. Not when he had already paid such a steep price for loving someone who left. Junho listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she thought the call might have dropped. Then his voice came, steady, without accusation. He heard her. He wasn't going to argue with her that night, but she needed to understand something. The thing she was afraid of doing to Min, leaving, she was already doing, and Min already knew. Then came the detail that undid her. The stone, Min's stone, placed on her empty chair. She didn't say anything after that. He said goodnight. They hung up. She sat with the phone in her hands for a very long time. Then she put it face down on her kitchen table, next to Marcus's photograph, and let herself feel the full weight of what she had been telling herself was a reasonable decision. It didn't feel reasonable anymore. It felt like fear wearing the costume of wisdom. She requested a schedule change at the restaurant. She stopped working Tuesdays. She told herself it was temporary, just enough distance to think clearly. She would figure out what she actually wanted and come back with an answer. She would not simply disappear. She was not someone who disappeared. But 2 weeks passed. Then 3. And the figuring out didn't produce an answer. It produced more questions, deeper ones, the kind that don't resolve on a schedule. She found herself standing in front of the windowsill at odd hours, at 6 a.m. before a shift, or at midnight after 1, looking at the 9 stones Min had given her, picking one up, holding it, feeling its weight, the way he did, as if the weight had something to tell her. She was beginning to wonder if she had made an irreparable mistake. The afternoon of February 3rd was mild and bright. Junho had a board meeting that ran long, until nearly 5 o'clock, and Min had been at his after-school program, as he was every weekday, in the quiet room with the good light and the patient teachers he had learned to trust over 2 careful years. The after-school program had been one of the best decisions of the last 2 years. It had taken most of the first year to find it. Junho had moved through 4 different programs before landing here. At a small center in Santa Monica, run by a woman named Dr. Osei, who had been working with autistic children for 20 years and who had told Junho, in their first meeting, that the goal was never to make Min more comfortable in the world as it currently existed, but to help him build the tools to move through it on his own terms. That had been the first conversation about Min that hadn't left Junho feeling like he'd failed something. Junho's driver picked up Min at 5:15. Min's after-school was on Olympic Boulevard in Santa Monica, 3 miles from Maria. This was not a coincidence. Originally, the program had been chosen partly for its location, in the period when Tuesdays had been anchored by the restaurant, when proximity had felt like logic. The driver knew the route. Min knew the route. Everyone knew the route. The driver pulled away from the curb, and made the first 2 turns on autopilot. At the 3rd turn, where they should have continued east, toward the freeway, Min reached forward and touched the back of the driver's headrest. Once, twice. A clear signal, in the language he and the driver had developed over months. Stop. Something needs to change. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Min was pointing west, toward the ocean. The driver, a kind man named Gerald, who had been with the family for 4 years and understood Min in the practical, affectionate way of someone who has learned on the job, paused. His voice was gentle when he confirmed it. Maria? The restaurant? Min didn't answer. He just pointed. Gerald made the turn. He texted Junho from the next red light. Min is asking to go to Maria, taking him there now. All good. Junho read the message in the elevator of his office building. He stood very still for a moment. Then he typed, "I'll meet you there." In the elevator, he thought about the fact that his 7-year-old son had redirected a car toward a restaurant 3 miles away to find a woman who had been absent for 3 weeks, using only gestures and certainty. He thought about the stone Min had placed on her empty chair. He thought about his own discipline, the practiced stillness, the refusal to reach, and understood, riding up to the 40th floor of a building he owned, that some things were not going to be disciplined away, that he was in love with Alana Griffith, and had been for long enough that it had become part of the structure of him, the way certain beliefs do, quietly, without announcement, until you find you cannot locate the point where they began. Alana was working a Thursday double. She had taken on extra shifts, partly for the money, partly because busyness was a reasonable substitute for thinking. She was carrying a tray of appetizers toward table 6 when the hostess touched her elbow. The hostess's voice was quiet, almost uncertain. There was a child at the host stand asking for her. Not in words. He had come to the desk and pointed. At Alana, specifically, like he had always known exactly where she was. Alana set the tray down on the nearest surface. She walked to the host stand, and there was Min, standing very straight in his school uniform, the small navy blazer and the white collar, with his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on her face with an expression of complete, uncomplicated certainty. He had found her. He had directed someone to drive him here, across 3 miles and a month of absence, with no language to explain why except the compass of his own internal knowing. Alana crouched down. Min reached into his blazer pocket. He took out the gray-blue stone, the one he had placed on her empty chair 3 weeks ago, the one Junho had described on the phone, and held it out to her. Both hands, steady. She took it. Her hands were not steady at all. She pressed the stone against her chest, and she held it there, and she let the full weight of the last month, the distance she had made, the fear she had called wisdom, the thing she had been protecting herself from, and the thing she had been protecting him from, and the way those 2 things had collapsed into each other until she couldn't tell them apart. She let all of it arrive. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her eyes went bright in a way that couldn't be controlled. And Min, who was watching her with the full, patient attention he gave only to things he considered important, reached forward and touched her cheek. 1 finger. Very gently. She heard the door open behind him. She didn't need to look up to know. She knew the particular quality of the silence that arrived with Junho. The way the room's atmosphere shifted slightly, the way the noise calibrated itself. She had learned this about him over weeks of Tuesdays. He changed the air when he entered. Not because of what he was, but because of how fully he was present in it. She looked up. He was standing just inside the door. His jacket was open. His tie was slightly loosened. He had driven fast, she understood, straight from the office. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. All the careful management gone. All the distance he kept between himself and what he felt. Gone. Just him. Just the truth of a man who had let himself want something again, and then watched it disappear and driven here the moment his 7-year-old son showed him where she was. Min was still beside her. He looked at his father. He looked at Alana. And then, in the motion that would live in Alana's memory with perfect clarity for the rest of her life, he reached out and took her hand in his left hand, and his father's hand in his right, and stood between them. Not pulling, just holding. The restaurant continued around them. A server passed with a tray. Someone at table 3 laughed. The ocean moved outside the glass, indifferent and steady as always. Junho took 2 steps forward. He stopped close enough that she would have to choose, toward him or away. He was not going to make that choice for her. He never would. She stood up from her crouch. Slowly. The stone still in her hand, Min's hand warm in hers, and the full, ridiculous, terrifying weight of what she actually wanted pressing against the inside of her chest, like something that had run out of room to be contained. The words came before she could measure them. She had been afraid of leaving before she even started. I know. 2 words, quiet and without any accusation in them at all. The harder truth followed. She didn't know how to be part of his world. He took 1 step closer. His answer was the most certain thing he'd said in months. He wasn't asking her to be part of his world. He was asking her to be part of Min's. And then, if she wanted, to let him figure out the rest of it alongside her, at whatever pace made sense, without any of the things she was afraid of becoming a reason to stop. Min tightened his grip on both their hands, not dramatically, just firmer, the way a child holds something they've decided they are keeping. She stepped toward him. February 3rd, a Thursday again. Alana turned 29 at 11:47 in the morning, according to her mother, who called from Atlanta and sang happy birthday badly and lovingly into the phone. By that point, Alana was already in class, her first semester of the occupational therapy program she had deferred 3 years ago, which had accepted her reapplication in November with no ceremony and complete matter-of-factness, as if the universe had simply been holding her spot. The reapplication had been Junho's idea, technically. Or rather, he had been the person who said, one evening in early September, that she had described her work with Min over many months, with the fluency of someone who had been trained for it, and that perhaps the deferral had not been a closed door but a propped one. He had not pushed. He had offered the observation, and then poured the tea and moved on. She had thought about it for 6 weeks before she did anything. She had quit Maria in October. Not dramatically. She had given 6 weeks' notice, trained her replacement personally, and hugged the hostess who had told her Min was at the door. That hostess cried. Alana had not expected that. She and Junho had taken things at exactly the pace she needed. He did not rush. He had a particular genius for patience. She understood now that it had been forged the hard way, in years of learning to follow Min's lead, of understanding that the right moment was the one the other person was ready for, and not 1 minute before. She had her own apartment still, a different one, closer to campus, slightly better light. She had dinner at his house on Wednesdays and Sundays. She helped Min with his reading program on Saturday mornings, using the same unhurried approach she had used in the corridor that first night, sitting beside him, not across from him, in the same world rather than a different one. Min had begun to trust her with the stone collection, not just giving her stones, that had been from the beginning, but showing her the system, the private criteria. He would line them up on the coffee table and point to each one in sequence, watching her face, as if checking whether she was reading them correctly. She had learned, over months, what the pointing meant. This one is the weight of it. This one is the color when wet. This one just knows. She wasn't always right, but she was always trying to understand, and Min, who had spent 7 years in a world that mostly didn't try, understood the difference. Min had started saying one word, occasionally, when something went right. A single syllable, quiet and serious, that his speech therapist confirmed was intentional and consistent. He said it when the light on the water looked the way he liked. He said it when he finished a stone collection and was satisfied with the results. He said it, twice, when Alana arrived on Saturday mornings and he heard her key in the lock. The word was, good. On the evening of February 3rd, Junho picked her up from campus. Min was in the back seat in his pajamas, which meant he had been told it was a special occasion and had dressed accordingly, in the most comfortable thing he owned, which was his correct understanding of what special occasions were supposed to feel like. They drove to the beach, the same stretch of Santa Monica waterfront, the one with the stones. They arrived in the last of the February dusk, the sky going pink and then purple over the water. Junho had a bag with food from Min's favorite Korean restaurant, the one near their house that always packed Min's rice separately and never put the sauces where they would touch each other. Min went immediately to the waterline and began the survey. Alana stood beside Junho. He put his arm around her, easy and unhurried, the way he had learned to be with her, present without pressing, warm without demanding. She leaned into it. She had 9 stones on her windowsill at home, the ones Min had given her on the first beach afternoon. She had kept them through the month of distance, through the scared nights and the unclear mornings. She had not been able to put them away. She understood now that they had been, the whole time, the answer she was looking for, proof that she had already been chosen, already been held on to, by someone who had no language for it other than to give her the best of what he found. She thought about Marcus sometimes, on evenings like this, not with the old ache that used to arrive without warning, the kind that dropped her mid-sentence, mid-step, as if grief were a pothole she kept forgetting was there. This was softer, more like acknowledgement, like turning towards something rather than away from it. She thought he would have liked Junho, his quiet steadiness, his refusal to perform anything he didn't feel. She thought he would have been completely undone by Min in the best possible way. Marcus had always been a person who met other people exactly where they were. He would have understood Min's language immediately and would have spent hours on the floor doing stone surveys with complete seriousness. She missed him the way you miss someone once you've learned to carry the missing as part of yourself rather than against yourself. Not lighter, just differently distributed. Down at the water's edge, Min crouched. He rotated a stone carefully. He pocketed it. He stood and turned and walked back toward them. And instead of going to his father, he went to Alana. He held out the stone, still warm from his hand. She held out both hands, the way she always did. An invitation, not a demand. He placed it in her palms, looked up at her. One word, quiet and serious. The way he said everything that mattered. Good. She closed her fingers around it. The ocean moved. The sky finished its slow change from purple to dark. Junho took her free hand and Min took the other, and the 3 of them stood there for a while, not saying anything, not needing to, while the world turned around them at exactly the pace they had chosen. It had started with a dance no one saw, with a woman who understood grief before she understood love, with a little boy who had been sitting alone in a room full of people who had learned not to look, and who had known, before anyone else, exactly who was worth reaching for. Some loves begin with a glance across the room. This one began with a hand, palm up, offered to someone who needed to know that the world had room for him, exactly as he was.